Hello and welcome to this edition of Great Western. Released in the shadow of the COVID lockdown, Dave Davies' Living on a Thin Line is his 2022 autobiography, and it's a good one. The book is actually a reissue of his 1997 autobiography, Kink. A friend of mine who is a huge Kinks fan tells me that the reissue has suffered a fair few edits, especially of material relating to Dave's intense spirituality. What we do get, though, is a bang-up-to-date memoir that takes us through Dave's illustrious past, but also the Kinks' 21st century. There are many places where we could start this fascinating biography. The origin of the Kinks lies in the London district of Muswell Hill and nearby Fortis Green. Here Dave and his elder brother Ray grow up in a hard-working, loving family. Ahead of them in the family are several sisters, so the household has quite a matriarchal feel, although the only male siblings will never get on well. A subject that I have been increasingly drawn to in my musings about rock music is the concept of the lost leader. The lost leader is the origin of the rock band, now departed. The person without whom it probably would never have happened. Sometimes they are still alive through the band's career, but usually they are dead and immortalised. Duane Allman springs to mind, as does Bon Scott and Adge Cutler. Look him up. And on the side of the living, Fish from Marillion and Peter Gabriel from Genesis. But until his death in 2006, the archetypal lost leader was, of course, Syd Barrett from Pink Floyd. The lost leader becomes the totem of an alternative future, a mythical fantasy about what might have been had they lived. This doesn't mean that the bands were any less successful for the loss, but they are forever competing with a fantasy future. Now, getting back to the subject in hand, the lost leader of the Kinks, in my view, is not a fellow musician, but one of Dave and Ray's elder sisters, Renee, a free-spirited young woman taken too soon. And there are parallels here with John Lennon's mother, Julia. Returning to Muswell Hill after a disastrous marriage in Canada, Renee attempts to rebuild her life in London, but battles serious health conditions. On Ray Davies' 13th birthday, the 21st of June 1957, they visit a music shop together and Renee buys Ray his first ever guitar. But tragically, that very night, she drops dead on a West End dance floor from a heart attack, and her mythical status in the story of the Kinks is assured. The rest is history. Whilst Renee was never a member of the Kinks, she remains an honorary member for getting Ray started in his chosen career. In the future fantasy world, we might say that there would have been no Kinks without lost leader Renee. But like all lost leader fantasies, the truth is no doubt far more mundane than the what could have been. In all likelihood, Ray would have brought the guitar eventually anyway. If you're watching this video, I'm sure I don't have to explain to you that the Kinks hit the big time in the mid-1960s, cementing their place as one of the seminal British rock bands of the 20th century. Success brings some money for Dave, but there are a lot of financial and management shenanigans. But it is characteristic of Dave's generous spirit that he doesn't spend endless pages detailing financial what could have beens. Certainly, Dave gently criticises certain figures for their failures, but you don't feel that he has an axe to grind. Perhaps one of the reasons for this is that fame got Dave enough money and success to engage in endless partying, rubbing shoulders with the Beatles, the Stones, the Hollies, and all the rest, often at the Scotch of St James Club in Mayfair. Graham Nash of the Hollies, whilst not a dear friend, becomes a typically no-nonsense early champion in the band's rise to fame. In terms of the triple A-list stars, John Lennon is the Beatle most mentioned in this autobiography, although Dave doesn't shy away from John's moody nature nor his competitive spirit. In this part of the autobiography, we see the Kinks grow as people. Brother Ray marries Rasa and begins a life of domesticity with his first child on the way. Dave messes up the best man speech by getting drunk. We also hear about Dave's complex romantic feelings for men and women, and his growing interest in science fiction, metaphysics, and the paranormal. And there are loads of parties. The partying leads to cases of bad behaviour. Decent chap as he appears to be, Dave is clearly remorseful about past deeds, especially violent and destructive incidents. We hear about the legendary onstage fight with Mick Avery in Cardiff, where Mick nearly decapitates Dave with a cymbal. Apparently, the police are called and Mick goes on the run, while Dave clings for life. I'm sure the tale gets taller with every telling. But whatever the truth, Dave and Mick Avery, rather like Ray and Dave themselves, have unresolved difficulties for decades afterwards. The hotel in Taunton is trashed, and their 1965 tour of America features so much unprofessional behaviour that the music unions banned the Kinks from the USA for several years, doubtless impacting on their popularity in the United States. Whilst this is partly the fault of youthful exuberance, it's also the fault of one of the band's managers, who leaves the tour early to concentrate on other interests. Dave certainly feels keenly that this shouldn't have happened. Dave marries a lovely Danish girl called Lisbet, and they get married and have a son called Martin. Dave turns 20 in 1967, but the partying has worn thin, and so has Lisbet's patience. If you are confused across these pages by the ever-changing nature of Dave's relationships with women, well, you're in good company, because I was too. The following is one of the most profound quotes in the book. All these personas we think we're supposed to have, when, in the end, we're stuck with ourselves and the frailty and disappointment of life. From the success of Lola in 1970, the 70s begin to go downhill for the Kinks. The last classic album of this period is Muswell Hillbillies. Ambitious concept albums such as Preservation Act 1 and 2 dominate, but they don't sell in big numbers. The rot sets in before this, though. In the late 60s, Dave is told by the owner of a boutique to pay cash for clothes. Clothes he normally would have been given for free in exchange for the publicity that it would generate for the boutique. Meanwhile, the band end up playing Swedish holiday camps. Quite bizarre, isn't it? Anyone for Krona Kinks? No? Okay. I'll stop with the jokes. In some ways, the worldwide success of Lola artificially props up the success of the band, as they are already falling out of fashion. Meanwhile, at home, Dave's continual partying is ruining his marriage to Lisbet and wrecking the family. Brutal honesty is the order of the day, as Dave describes undoing the sink drain to recover pills, as Lisbet attempts to get Dave away from his drug addiction and restore their happy home. Sometimes Dave's ideas are ridiculous, perhaps as a result of his partying and addictions. He invites Lisbet to be a sort of co-wife with his new flame Nancy. Unsurprisingly, neither woman is totally happy with the idea. A lot of Dave's relationships with women are underpinned by the sad events of the early 1960s, when he attempts to marry his first true love, Sue Sheehan. Unfortunately, the marriage is blocked by both parents, and the couple are unable to see each other for nearly 30 years, with Dave unable to see their child, daughter Tracy. A lot of Dave's relationships are messy and complicated, but we see from the book that he isn't the only 60s rock star having trouble. In 1978, Dave briefly reconnects with Keith Moon of The Who in Los Angeles. Keith is in a shocking state. To Dave's lasting regret, he doesn't spend any meaningful time with him, and Keith dies a few months later. Dave sees Keith's death as a transactional moment in some ways. Keith was not so lucky and dies, but someone is looking down on Dave and he lives. Yet both are flawed characters with failed marriages and years of destructive partying to their names. But Dave makes it. Perhaps there is a higher purpose for him. Throughout the book, Dave recounts his fascination with mysticism and the occult, a fascination that deepens with every passing year. By the late 1970s, the Kinks are starting to experience a resurgence, beginning with the album Low Budget in 1979. At around this time, Dave experiences psychic events, voices in his head which he calls the intelligences. I have to admit that I found this part of the book quite baffling, and I moved through it pretty quickly. Dave seems to have found the positive and negative voices helpful in evaluating his sometimes disastrous life choices. While some people might think this experience is the result of years of partying and substance abuse causing mental health issues, Dave is sincere and candid in his belief that these experiences were real and connected him with spirits beyond this world. If you're expecting Living on a Thin Line to be endless reminiscences about the 60s and the 60s rock stars, you couldn't really be more wrong. There is a lot of this paranormal material in the book, and I have to say that it was more than enough for me personally. However, I do commend Dave on his frankness and honesty in these matters. The title of the book itself is worth a mention. Living on a Thin Line was a standout track from the Kinks' 1984 album Word of Mouth. In this autobiography, Dave describes the thin line as the line between poverty and riches that many people struggle to cross. He also gives it a second meaning about the relationship between him and his brother Dave. It's a thin line between them loving and hating one another. I have a personal theory of my own that I don't recall seeing in the book. Did he give the book this title because there is a third meaning to this song? Is the thin line the closeness that Dave feels to an invisible spiritual world? Is the supernatural ready to break through at any time for Dave? Now, if you have any further insight on the meaning of the book's title and the validity of my theory, then please comment below and I'll do my very best to get back to you. I welcome the debate. In the early 1980s, Ray and Dave are approached to play the Kray twins in a proposed movie. But Dave feels it sets the wrong tone because by this point, people understood how nasty the Krays were. But in terms of brotherly rivalry, surely Dave and Ray could give Ronnie and Reggie a run for their money. Even as far back as 1964 and the massive hit You Really Got Me, the brothers Davies are at each other's throats. The famous "Oh no" that precedes the solo is seen by Dave as Ray's slight on his playing ability. To me, this seems ridiculously paranoid, but as with everything that Dave says in this book, there isn't the slightest hint of dishonesty or that he doesn't believe it. Well, thankfully, nothing can spoil this classic rock moment for me, and Ray's exclamation has gone down as one of the classic lines in rock history. Another bone of contention between the brothers is publishing rights and artistic contributions to Kinks albums. Dave feels continually undermined and obscured by his brother's ego. More than a few times, Dave is promised credit that never appears, such as on State of Confusion in 1983, where Ray removes Dave from the writing and arrangement credits. Again. And once again, the title of this autobiography becomes the focus of another story. In this case, Dave asks why Living on a Thin Line, which was getting huge radio play in America, was not released as a single from word of mouth. But the answer from management is clear. Unbeknown to Dave, brother Ray has amended the contract so that the first 3 singles from any Kinks album must be Ray Davies' original compositions. Oh no, indeed. Like a ground down prisoner, it's the little victories against the authority figures that give the most pleasure, as Dave hilariously gets his own back by forcing Ray to perform You Really Got Me whilst dressed as Father Christmas. If you want more on that, you need to read the book. 1989 sees the Kinks inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame by none other than Graham Nash. Things have come full circle for the band. Although only Dave and Ray are the remaining original members of the Kinks, the 1980s has been good for them, and their records are selling in reasonable quantities in the UK and the USA. They are also a popular live act around the world. As the 1980s turn into the 1990s and the 2000s, we find Dave quoting more and more from lyrics from his solo albums, which may or may not be insightful depending on your taste. I must be honest and say I didn't find these particularly interesting or revelatory. A 2014 solo song called Fortis Green is Dave's way of bringing his career full circle. And it's at this point that he makes one of the most profound quotes in the book, which I found really helpful. For Dave, and perhaps for you and me, reminding ourselves of where we have come from and the people who surrounded us in our formative years can be a very grounding and calming experience, as our lives seem to get more and more out of control with every passing year. He says this: Fortis Green reminded me that I wasn't going crazy. I could still relate to this world and my background. Well, many's the time that I have returned to something from my distant past and have felt strangely reinvigorated to meet the challenges of the future. So I totally understand where Dave is coming from on this point. And hence we come to the end of this review of Living on a Thin Line. Dave Davies avoids many of the obvious pitfalls of rock autobiographies, such as endless complaints about management and money, deflecting blame that should belong to him onto other people, and glossing over difficult and complicated aspects of his life. He does none of these. Of course, the relationship with Brother Ray is going to cause a lot of interest to readers, and I don't think you will be disappointed. I don't want to overuse the word honest in relation to Dave's writing, but I think he discusses the past and present dramas with a certain warmth and fairness. Although even after his stroke in 2004, he can only stand to convalesce at Ray's home for a fortnight. After that, he was out of there. Although not quite in the very highest echelons of musical society in the 1960s, and by that I mean the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, Dave still provides very helpful insight into the world of music and celebrities in 60s swinging London, neither minimising nor exaggerating his relationships with the people he rubbed shoulders with. It's a good book, and I recommend that you read it. And to close, as I often say at the end of my reviews of rock autobiographies, sincere thanks to you, Dave Davies, for the wonderful memories, and may God bless you and your family. If you've got something to say, please let's start a debate in the comments section below. This channel, like every YouTube channel, is nothing without subscribers and commenters and people who like videos. I hope you appreciate what I'm trying to do here at Great Western, and please like and subscribe. And thank you for watching.